Good afternoon. Well, more, of course, on today on the announcement that is absolutely going to affect you and how much money you have for you and your family at the end of every month. The Monetary Policy Committee of the Reserve Bank unanimously deciding this afternoon in the last half hour to raise interest rates by 50 basis points. Our business anchor, Motheo Khoaripe, in the studio with us. Motheo, good afternoon to you. 50 basis points. Ouch.
Yeah, Stephen, I think payday has become pain day today for most South Africans who got their salaries today. The Reserve Bank saying it's a unanimous decision this time around. Last time it was a 3-2 split between the Monetary Policy Committee. That basically just shows us that everyone agrees that South Africa is in a tight spot, and it's their responsibility as the Sarb and their mandate to make sure that they protect the rest of us as an economy. Why am I saying this? Well, inflation is quite high. Food inflation remains quite high, 13.9%. It came in yesterday. And, of course, their mandate is to make sure they drop that inflation. And they decided, look, let's take the gloves off. Everyone's going to be hurt, and we're going to be the bad guys. I think in the long run, will show why we're doing this. And they're following this particular policy in terms of inflation because, as he said, they paid the school fees in 1998 following the exchange rates, trying to control how the rand moves. They have no business with that. Inflation means they're just trying to make sure that your buying power, when you hold a 100 rand note, you still feel it can buy at least a few items when you're at the store.
It really is about what happens if the price of bread goes up by 30 or 40% year on year. We've seen that happen in places like Turkey. It's been happening in Argentina for some time. It's been happening in many other places around the world. No one's feeling good about this, but it could be worse.
Yeah, it could be worse. And I mean, to play advocate for them, you look at the U.S., it had 9.1 inflation in June last year. They have about 4.9 now, and they've been consistently raising interest rates. In fact, they have had 10 consecutive interest rates, just like we've just had. And, you know, basically the Sarb saying, look, I trust the process, stick with it. Yes, it's going to be painful, but it's going to work out. I mean, Germany today reporting that consumer spending was down in the country, and that's because inflation is high there too. They have just gone into a technical recession. So they're trying to avoid this. The talking about growth in the country at 0.3%, up from 0.2% in the March meeting. They are quite buoyant about growth. I don't think the rest of us are, given our power problems and all the problems that we face as a country in terms of trying to get growth going. But I think he's not trying to be alarmist in saying we're facing a recession quite soon. He'd rather let the numbers do the talking. Stats say will give us that number. But he's basically saying, as a committee, they are buoyant that South Africa should be able to inch out some sort of growth from the economy.
Of course, our population is growing more quickly, so we're still going backwards, depending on how you look at these things. But the R word does matter in these debates. This is really, in a way, a tale of load shedding, isn't it? I mean, 2 percentage points cut off growth because of load shedding. Food price inflation high because of load shedding.
I was reading their speech from the March meeting, and one of the risks, the major risk, was, of course, the power supply in the country, and that still remains a few months later. I mean, it hasn't even been 2 weeks where Eskom is telling us we're going into the colder months, we should expect at least level 5 of load shedding. And if their contingency plans don't work, we should expect at least stage 8 in terms of load shedding. Now, if you look at the companies in the country, South Africa is a big manufacturing country, a big mining country, a big agricultural country. All those sectors really relying on electricity to produce the food that we eat and give us some of the services that we need. And they've been reporting results on the JSE, all of them talking about how much they're actually spending on making sure they have backup power, how much they're spending on making sure they have diesel. RFG, one of the packages that makes roads, and Bull Brand talking about they spent 2 million rand a week for the past 6 months to end March to make sure that the lights were on at that particular company. So we're not hearing companies talking about spending capital to create jobs or, to extend their businesses, but everybody's trying to make sure they sit on their hands and survive this particular period. So the power crisis in the country is really the bad guy and not really the Sarb.
I mean, the gift to give this Christmas is a litre of diesel, right?
For sure. I'm sure you'll get a kiss on the cheek for that.
I mean, that's really what it boils down to. So if we took all of that, and one of the things that's so interesting and hard to calculate is the overall cost of load shedding, because it has what they call second-round effects, but again and again and again and again and again. So it puts transport costs up, it puts diesel up, it puts the price of the cold chain up, which puts the price of chicken up. But the price of chicken's already high because it's cost more to produce the chicken, because they usually live under under lights. It costs more to slaughter the chicken. If you miss your slot, the chicken are too big. All these sorts of things are mounting up. We're kind of at a point now, I think, where we're beginning to actually really see the costs of this.
Definitely. We're seeing the effects of it. In the beginning, it was really still, you might feel it at the till, and a lot of producers of these foods. I mean, Astral, the biggest chicken producer in the country, talking about they're not going to pass on the cost to consumers. But I think they actually have run out of room themselves, because load shedding is an ongoing problem. A government is not coming up with the right type of answers, and everybody's going to run out with the patience of having to buffer consumers from rising prices. So, of course, those second-round effects that you're talking about are going to get to consumers eventually. And imagine that inflation is already this high, and the costs have not been passed down to us as consumers. So that's going to hurt a bit. I think I heard him correctly, Alisija Khanyago, saying load shedding costing out about 0.2 percentage points to our growth, and he's now said our growth is going to be 0.3 percentage points. So it would have been 0.5 if load shedding was not.
I think he meant 2%. 2%.
Yeah.
I think was what I heard. So I mean, we would have had much stronger growth. I mean, there's an interesting phrase that he used. So normally towards the end of these briefings, and maybe my hair's just too grey and I'm too veteran at this, but he says he's been using the word, we view the stance as accommodative. Today he used the word restrictive, and some of the journalists caught up on that. What does he mean by restrictive? Why is that so important? Does it mean that he realizes it's hurting the economy?
Yeah, look, let's go back to 2021, November, when they start raising interest rates. The repo rate then was at 3.5%. We'd just come out of tight, we just come out of the lockdowns, is what I'm trying to get to. That's how far back it was. In November 2021, they'd raise interest rates then. Very accommodative, gradually doing it. In fact, South Africa was one of the first countries to raise interest rates at that point, ahead of the curve, ahead of everyone else. But now they're saying it hasn't worked. And the reason why it hasn't worked in our economy and it has worked in other economies like the US is because we have a power problem. And of course, our rand is far more fragile than the US dollar, for instance. Now they're saying they're becoming restrictive. Now, what does that mean? Being restrictive as a policy decision is making sure that there's less money supply in the system, which means there'll be less credit cards issued. There'll be less credit issued to South Africans. And why is he doing this? Because he realizes as he was raising interest rates, a lot of households then went to the banks and said, my salary is not making it to the end of the month. Can you give me a payday loan or give me just a little bit more? Which puts a lot of households under even more pressure. So he's realizing that's happening, and it's going to force households now to not spend at all. And what does that do? If we don't spend, retailers will be forced to drop down the prices. And what does that do? Inflation goes down. So that's the play that he's going at, and that's why he's saying they're a bit more restrictive this time around.
There's so many different things going on in the economy at the moment. I mean, we had the CPI figures yesterday showing how high food prices are, up 20% for breads and cereals in that particular basket. For some, I think I saw onions over 50%. I mean, that's just incredible. We're kind of at a point now where people are past battling to survive. I think they may be running out of options. Unfortunately, for some businesses, an interest rate hike like this, and I accept what the bank says, it doesn't really have much of a choice. In a way, a lawyer could argue the bank has a duty to do this because of the letter it receives from the finance minister. But people are now out of options. There's nowhere left to turn.
We've had the cuts. We've looked at our budgets. We've taken away the discretionary spending that we had. People are cutting all sorts of syntax. People are quitting smoking to try and get around it. We've done everything. We've done our part as consumers. They're now doing their part. They being the strict parent and saying, look, in this household of South Africa, we're not spending anymore. And we're not going to spend until we're in a better position. And I think you can't really tell consumers what to do now. They've tried it all, And the thing is that we also face another problem. While we're cutting, we also have to try to find the money to also have backup power, whether we're buying gas, whether we're also trying to get into inverters or UPS devices. That's extra spend, and a lot of South Africans are trying to get around that. And with load shedding and extended periods of load shedding, we even have to eke out more money to eat takeouts. So it never balances, and that's why they're being more restrictive. So it forces even the industries now to stop giving us, a leg to stand on.
Motheo Khoaripe, thank you very much indeed. A lot more to come from him, of course. More analysis on the decision by the Monetary Policy Committee of the Reserve Bank. Don't blame me, blame them. An increase an interest rate of 50 basis points. We're talking about how important load shedding is to all of this. Eskom involved in negotiations with its workers. More on that with the Labour analyst Andrew Levy in a moment.